Here, we found the most inhumane conditions we had seen so far. Unattended and bored, these infants spend their days tied together in a potty bench. With no stimulation other than the occasional thump from an older inmate, one action they all have in common is a relentless rocking motion.
All girls, of course, unless they are handicapped boys, but healthy boys is never abandoned, ever.
We wanted to see for ourselves that it really is only girls that are rejected, so we made a point of checking the gender of every baby we found. She's got 3 pieces of string down her body, across her chest, across the middle, and down by her feet. This is plastic, and then there's 2 layers of thick material, and it's sort of almost like a bodice around the body to keep it straight. And underneath, it's sort of very constricted, very tight, and she's very wet inside. It's another little girl.
The government's one-child policy dictates only the number of children a family may have. It says nothing about the preferred sex.
One-child policy tended to not take the Chinese traditional cultural some preferences into consideration. Some generally carry the family lines. So obviously the son is more important than the daughter. Now given each family in the sense is limited to only one child, then the gender become a very important concern to each family.
Across China, 21 million babies are born every year. That's a new life every 1.5 seconds. Already, there are more than 1.2 billion people living here.
This is the largest population in the world on a very small quantity of land. And the Chinese state has known for many years that if they didn't limit the population or reduce it, that by the middle of the next millennium, there would be a fight for food and a general starvation.
When Deng Xiaoping and China's leaders were trying to get China back on track, they were told by Western experts from the World Bank and the United Nations that they must control China's population. So one of the things that Deng decreed in 1979 was that China's population must be controlled. He said, quote, "Use whatever means you must to control China's population. Just do it. With the support of the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party, you have nothing to fear." End of quote.
This was the beginning of the one-child family policy, a law which dictates that every family can have no more than one child. This policy has led to vast numbers of babies being dumped at the state orphanages. Along with Tibet and Tiananmen Square, this law, hated by the people of China, has brought the state international condemnation.
They know that the American Congress keeps millions of dollars away from Chinese birth control programs because of this. The UN is very touchy about it. It gets raised all the time by official visitors to China. The Chinese state denies it is a big problem, although, of course, it is a red-hot, dangerous, internationally sensitive matter.
Because it's so contentious, anyone in China took a great risk talking to us at all. But feeling against the one-child policy is so strong that we were able to find some Chinese interviewees who would speak out.
A woman who already had one child when the police discovered she was pregnant without permission told us about her enforced abortion.
She want to make other one, and now she have a baby in the body for 5 months. So the policeman find this lady, catch this lady to hospital, take the baby down. If you put the medicine in the inside, so inside, so the baby is dying.
And it kills the baby?
Kill the baby. Take the baby out.
She said that at the same time as the doctors gave her an abortion, they also sterilized her.
In China, we have credible reports of women being locked up, incarcerated, until they submit to an abortion, of women being aborted or sterilized during the course of other medical procedures without their foreknowledge or permission, of their husbands being arrested or actually imprisoned until their wives submit to abortions, of babies being killed at birth by means of a lethal injection into the fontanelle, that is the soft spot of the child's skull, of couples having their electricity or their water cut off to their homes until they submit to these procedures, of homes actually being destroyed, of couples who resist sterilization or abortion. The list of human rights abuses in China's one-child policy is very lengthy.
China has for centuries been a very repressive society for women. Concubines were only outlawed shortly after the revolution, and as recently as the early 1900s, crippling foot binding was not uncommon. Even in modern China, though the communists have made a concerted effort to fight traditional prejudice, women are still very definitely second class.
I remember as a child going with my mother, father to my grandmother's house, so my paternal grandmother, who was very traditionally Chinese, and she would say to my father, "Oh, I've got dinner ready for you, please sit down." And my father would sit down on his own, and we would all stand around the table and watch him eat. And when he'd finished eating, and tons of dishes, she would turn around as if in great surprise to my mother and say, "Oh, would you like to eat too?" So clearly in her mind, here was the golden, son and heir, and all the favors were bestowed on him, and we were very much secondary.
The celebration between the boys and the girls are very big different. For example, for the boys, when they were just born out, there were fireworks. Yeah, but the girls never will do. And girls are called Lai Di or Zhao Di. That means boys come, boys come. And there are more than 6 million women in China called Lai Di and Zhao Di. So you can see the common belief of hoping, of expecting boys.
Before 1949, you can see some of the poor families, if they cannot afford so many daughters, they either give away those daughters or they just abandon them somewhere. And during the famine period of time, the family, if they're hungry, they have to probably kill some of their daughters in order to keep alive for the rest of the other family members, especially the son.
Girl babies are called maggots in the rice in the countryside because their families have to pay to bring them up. Then as soon as they get into their teens, they marry and leave their family to join their husband's family.
Now, what the one-child policy has meant is that in this game of birth roulette, you only get one chance to have a son. Peasant parents were put in a very difficult situation. If they allowed their little girl to live, they wouldn't have a chance to have a little boy. And so all of a sudden, throughout China, not just in areas poor areas where you had occasionally seen female infanticide, but even rich areas, you began to hear reports of female infanticide. And little girls are simply taken at birth and plunged into a bucket of water before they have a chance to draw their first breath. That's a direct result of the one-child policy.
Infanticide is the last resort. More often, the newborn daughters are simply abandoned.
Some of them maybe die of hunger. Some of them may be picked up by the gangs to become beggars in the street, and some of them may be lucky to send to the orphanage.
In this orphanage, only an adolescent girl in a white coat was watching over the children. We were led into the baby's room by a handicapped child, and the smell hit us first: sour milk, urine, and unwashed bodies.
I have worked as a volunteer in different kinds of orphanages, and you can see how lifeless, in some cases, the children really are, because they just don't have that human contact. And it's because, I guess, there's a shortage of manpower and time and resources, and one person is left to care for far too many babies.
At least 15 million baby girls have disappeared since the one-child policy began. That's 2 every minute. Many of them have been aborted once an ultrasound scan has confirmed they are female. There are no official statistics on how many babies are abandoned.
My hometown is a small village, but even there, in 1 month, there are more than 6 to 7 child. They are abandoned in the street.
All girls?
All girls, of course.
If this journalist's village is average, that could mean as many as 1 million babies are deserted across China every year.
We were shown the orphanage's latest arrival, an abandoned baby girl. Here in front of us already was evidence that babies really are dumped on the street, like kittens in a sack. From now on, she will be identified only by her luggage label. This gives her name, her approximate birth date, and the day she was brought in. She is to be called Bao Ming, Ming meaning brightness, and Bao the surname given to all of this month's babies. Bao Ming is the 10th baby to arrive this month, and if the month is to be average, another 25 are on their way. These babies are the lucky ones, as this orphanage is one of the best. We discovered that last year 400 little girls were dumped here. Yet when we looked round, we could see no more than a dozen, and most of these had clearly been born this year. We asked an aid worker where the babies disappear to.
To my experience, 2 possibilities. One is they passed away because of illness, or another possibility which is got adopted. But I would say this is a small number. Usually if they are gone, then usually I would feel very sad to ask because I'm afraid to know the answer. And they will say, they're just gone. And I say, what do you mean gone? They died. That's it.
The orphanage director told us that last year most of the babies had arrived in the steaming summer months when viruses spread quickly. They ended up in this building. With newborns 5 to a cot in temperatures of over 100 degrees, 1 in every 5 died.
The Chinese government is extremely sensitive to criticism from the West in all areas because of traditional Chinese considerations of face. So now the Chinese government refuses to admit that there are abuses in its state-run orphanages or in the one-child policy as a whole because they're afraid of losing face.
The Chinese government is trying hard to re-educate the population to value girls as highly as boys, not least because it faces a frightening imbalance of the sexes. Western governments have allowed the United Nations Fund for Population Activities to give China millions of dollars in aid in support of the one-child policy. Yet the prospects of many more millions of baby girls are set to get even worse in the years ahead.
In February 1995, the party general secretary himself, Jiang Zemin, made a speech in which he said that China's population was still increasing too rapidly. He set a new goal for China's population. What this means is tremendous coercion on women to submit to abortions and sterilizations. And I think it also means that however overcrowded China's orphanages are now with baby girls, that problem is likely to get worse, very much worse, in the near future.